Hello, DevOps people. I'm happy to have you here. My name is Jochen. Welcome to my stream. Okay, let's dive right into things. Last week, I've been busy working on a new DNS cookbook that will run with Chef in our infrastructure. My company, Freestyle IT, has a web hosting platform, so DNS is kind of an important part of that. And so far, we have been using a very old fork of the DJB DNS cookbook, which creates DNS zones out of data bag items. So we have a data bag named DNS with lots of JSON files that contain all the zone records for the many zones we have in our DNS. And so far this has been working quite well. However, recently we found that our cookbook is missing one important feature, and that's creating DNS data out of infrastructure information. Since Chef knows a lot about our server setup and the roles these servers have, it's ideal to create DNS entries automatically. For example, creating SPF records to automatically whitelist servers that will probably send email for our customers. Instead of maintaining these server lists manually, as we've been doing so far, we'd like to automate this completely and use the information we already have in Chef. That's why I undertook the project of creating a new DNS cookbook. And a while ago, I did a little bit of research which DNS server would be the right thing to use. Excuse me. Hey, correct streamer. Thanks for the compliment. I'll take that. So I found that NSD would be an interesting DNS server. Well, thank you very much. I didn't know that my beard is that a big part of my personality, but it might have become. So I went to GitHub and took a look if there is any Chef cookbook that already deals with NSD, and I actually found one. So I decided to fork it and maybe contribute back as soon as I have something to contribute. In the meanwhile, I got the feeling that this cookbook is very rudimentary because its author didn't know how to add zone data or didn't want to add it. So I'm not sure if it's actually possible for me to contribute back, because I guess I'm going to change a lot in this cookbook. Simply to have more business logic in the cookbook. I guess I've never worked with Python in production, but they are, I guess, very similar, especially in terms of how they do object orientation. And that's what will keep me busy today. Because this time is the first time I'm seriously trying to separate business logic from the core Chef stuff, which is create configuration files, start services, and things like that. Since Cobra just asked what I mean with scalable web infrastructure. It means that we have hundreds of servers that run the websites of our customers. And without automation, we wouldn't be able to run all this infrastructure with a team of basically 4 people. And that's exactly what I'm doing here on my live stream. I'm building code, but this code isn't actually an application or something. It's infrastructure code that runs within the context of Chef, a configuration management system, and basically configures all our infrastructure. It sets up servers and stuff like that. And I make sure to explain a few things on the way. Okay. So where I left off last week was with basically building the business logic for the creation of zone data. Yeah, Cobra, I can wholeheartedly agree. Managing a lot of things manually is a pain in the ass. And that's why we try to automate all the things. And Chef is the biggest part in that. Thanks for following. So, how do we do this? Let's take a look at the test recipe I've built, because that will show how it's meant to work. So what I'm doing here is using the NSDX record resource that I've built myself, and use this resource to create DNS entries. In this case, I'm creating a DNS entry for www.example.com, and I assign the IP address 1234. Next up, I'll define an MX record for mail exchangers for the domain example.com, and I'm using the server name MX1 for that. A program that gives CRUD possibilities into an DNS server. Well, what this thing is supposed to do is set up the NSD DNS server, so run the service and everything, and create the zone files that have all the DNS records in them, all these A records with IP addresses, all these MX records with mail server names and stuff like that. And this is only a test recipe that shows a very basic example. In the zone file, each of these records will only be a single line. And here this test recipe makes things a bit excessive, because for one line in the zone file we are using 6 or 8 lines in this recipe. That's not very efficient. The thing is that I can use the same resource, this NSDX record here, to create a record from data that's stored in the Chef database. And Chef knows which servers we have, what IP addresses these servers have, and what roles these servers have. So I can say, Chef, give me all our mail servers, all servers that can send mail. And then I'll simply automatically create these MX records or SPF records to make sure they don't get blacklisted in spam blacklists and things like that. So take this as a short example how this could work. All these attributes here, these properties, could come from variables and will probably come from variables, because, as I said, it doesn't make sense to literally write these things down. It would be more efficient to write the zone file itself. And in order for this to work, we need to collect all these records and go through the whole recipe, store everything somewhere, and when it's time to write the zone configuration file, which happens here in the master recipe, you can ignore all this stuff. The main thing here is this template resource here that writes a single zone file, and I somehow have to pass all the information that I've collected into the variables of this template so that in the end I get a complete zone file. And actually that creates a lot of business logic behind the scenes, because what the core chef stuff is installing the NSD package, starting the NSD service, writing the base configuration, that's another template resource up here, and then write all the zone files. That's all that's chefy to this, but all the collection of these records and that stuff, that's what has been keeping me busy here. And so that's what I'm going to continue today. At the moment, the things don't work because I've broken them on the way, and I struggled a bit with how to separate business logic from these chef recipes and how far to go with that. I had quite a bunch of circular dependencies. Okay, in order for this to work, I need to have it work here, but this won't work until I've solved the other problem. And so I was that close to say, okay, we'll just leave it, and I'll build the business logic into the recipe itself the same way I've done it for years. And then I remembered, yeah, the way I've done it for years might not be the best way, because it munges together business logic with all the chef stuff that happens on the system, and it's very hard to maintain. So what I decided to do today is create proper classes for all the objects that I have to take care of, and then add a few helper methods that I can use in recipes or in resource definitions to make things easier. But first of all, it's pure Ruby programming here, creating the classes that I need. And so far I've identified 3 classes. The main thing that is going into the zone files themselves is a list of records, DNS records. That's the first class I need to build. Exactly, the way to make something work is to break it first, and so we are halfway there. Second is each of these DNS records belong to a certain zone, domain. So that's the second class I'm going to build. And these zones need to be stored somewhere until we have to use them, until we have to write the zone files. And for that I'm going to build a zone registry class that simply does all the storage, basically. And okay, I don't have the browser tab open anymore. There is a way to store data during a chef run And I'm going to use it. Last time I said, okay, I'm not going to use it. I'd rather use. Well, we can try it to do it the old way by simply defining class level variables. Let's see if no. I'm going to use the chef way, which is the run state hash that I get when I have a chef node object. You'll soon see how this works. So the double at declares this variable as a class level variable. So this variable would exist only once because the class does only exist once, which is opposite to the instances of this class, which can be as many as you want. And each instant can have instance variables, which would only be a single at sign. But I'm going to change this anyway, so you can disregard this for the time being. What I'm going to do is I'll create a normal zone registry class which works with instances, in this case only a single instance, but that's not a problem. I don't care. So what we need is a constructor. In Ruby that's the initialize method. And what I'm going to do is pass in the node object. In Chef, the node object knows everything about the server Chef is running on. Its IP address, its name, the services that are installed and stuff. It's a huge hash basically that contains everything that there is to know about the server. And I'll need a bit of this information. So what I'm going to do is store the argument node in my instance variable node. So if I instantiate this class in an object, this object will have its own node variable where I simply have a pointer to the node object. So that's why I don't need the self here too. We can simply use normal methods. So this is basic object-oriented programming. The first thing that I need to do is add a zone to this registry. Hey, Oliball. Welcome back. Good to see you. So I'll probably do something like add zone. And pass in a zone object, whatever this will be. And I'm going to use the node object and its run state hash. And I'll simply use a key that's basically my namespace here. And I've already defined the cookbook constant up here as nsdx. So my hash key here is nsdx, and I have to hope that no one else is using this global hash with the key nsdx, but that's very unlikely. And I'll check if the zone's name is already a sub key in here, or we could actually set this up as, yeah, makes sense. We can first check that when we initialize the zone registry, we can initialize our hash key to contain another hash, a nested hash. If we could say unless run state does already have a key named nsdx. So that's taking care of the initialization. So what we can do in add zone is basically simply say node run state cookbook. This looks like a method that I'd like to extract here right away, which I'll do in a second. Cookbook zone name equals zone. So I'll have a nested hash which has as the hash keys all the zone names, and the value will simply be an array of records. Now I've already used node run state cookbook 2.5 times. So what I'm going to do is start a private method section here. I can move the existing methods up later when we need them, and I'll say we'll call this method storage hash. And that will return node run state cookbook. So instead of this, we can simply say storage. That won't really work. No. We'll basically have to initialize this here. Add node run state cookbook, and then as soon as we have made sure that node run state cookbook, this top level hash exists, then we can simply return the hash. So I can say here storage hash zone name equals zone. And we'll probably need well, there's the zone method from below, which returns the zone with this name, and that's simply storage hash zone name. And if you want a list of all the zone names, you can get this as well by simply saying storage hash keys, which gives me all the keys of my hash. Okay, I guess that's pretty straightforward. So while we are building up our zone record database, so to say, we'll simply call add zone, add zone, add zone, and if I need to get that stuff back, I can use zones to get all the names of the zones, and I can get the zone method with a name to get what's stored for this zone. Yeah. could even override the lower than method, which would make this even more elegant. But we can do the cosmetics later. So that's that. Then we have the zone class, and I've mainly built this already. We initialize it with a name, for example, example.com. Store this name in the name attribute of this instance, and initialize a records attribute, which is an empty array. And with add record, I can add records to this array, and with records I'll get the array back. That's all there is. The nice thing is that I can pass in whatever I like, because Ruby is untyped, so I could use everything under the sun as a record, but it's going to be a resource record object, which I'll initialize with a record hash, just to be precise. Store this in its record attribute, and then I can return the zone name. I can return a bind9 entry, which I'll need to write the zone file itself. The zone file records need to be written in a certain format, and that format depends on the type of record. So if it's an A record, it has this format. If it's an X record, it has this format. And I'll have to add a few more formats for the other types of records we're going to have. And then I have here a number of getter methods basically, and I could build this a bit more sophisticated by simply using attributes for this. So we'll have a let's keep it this way for the time being. I can always refactor this later. Okay. So thanks, Stu. Welcome to the stream, and I'm happy you like what you see. If there's anything you'd like me to explain or to make clearer, for example, if you're not too familiar with Chef or with Ruby, let me know, and I'll be happy to explain a few things. I just don't know how to go, how far to go with this, because this is not supposed to be a training session. I'd like to really build this cookbook and be able to pass it on to my team, because they are desperately waiting for it. Okie dokie. Okay, I'll go far and deep. So, thing is, I need to use these classes that I've just defined at quite a few places. For example, in the zone resource. So just to go back to my test recipe here. So I have a zone record, which gets prefixed by the cookbook name NSDX, a zone resource that tells Chef, here's something that you need to deal with. In this case, it's a zone. And Chef says, yeah, whatever. I'll take these properties and pass them on to this resource named zone here, where I've defined, okay, this resource can have two properties, in this case, a name and a contact. The contact, both are strings, and contact actually has a default value. if I call this resource with the create action, which also should be the default, I'd like to store simply these two properties as the zone information. So name and contact need to be somehow translated into a zone class, a zone object basically, and stored somewhere. I think I could try going the direct way. Instead of using a helper method, let's see if my object design, my class design is robust enough to carry me here. If I say, okay, I'd like to add a zone, so I need to get a zone registry. NSDX zone registry new for the node we are running on. Then we get a zone object, NSDX zone, with exactly the data we have here, dot new. And then I can say registry dot add zone. I think that should work. So we can get rid of that completely because it just isn't used, and I think we can get rid of the include here as well. Let's see if this works. So let's strip down our test recipe here to only use the zone resource. I'll comment out everything else. So this should run. If we simply, let's go into our test configuration. Now that's not Ruby, that's a YAML file that simply defines how to run tests with my recipe. And the run list for my test server here will have only my test recipe, which will only define this zone, and then do nothing about it. But let's take it baby steps. So if I run kitchen converge, which is the test suite, so Chef is the configuration management software, and it has a test tool named Test Kitchen. And so with Kitchen I can spin up a virtual machine or a container as a test server, and then it'll run my Chef code. Let's see what happens if I do that. Please don't break. No, of course it breaks. And why does it break? It doesn't say here. Let's scroll up a bit. Okay, so I don't have an NXDX zone resource, basically. So that's something very basic. Without this resource, I can't do anything. So let's see why it doesn't do this. My test recipe actually is part of a test cookbook that I've nested into this application cookbook. So let's take a look at this. I guess I simply didn't tell Chef that my test cookbook depends on my NSDX cookbook. So NSDX didn't get included, and that's why my tests aren't running. Let's see if that does the trick. Does not. Why not? Okay, now the trace is a bit longer. I basically did something wrong in zone RB dot in zone RB line 42. Wrong number of arguments. Well, that should be easy to resolve. Let's see what zone RB line 42 does. Oh yeah. No. Ah, okay, yeah. The key method, even though Ruby allows a question mark in method names, is a method, and arguments of methods have to be in parentheses, not in brackets. So, simple syntax error. More errors. Okay, undefined method name in add zone line 28. Yeah, I'm calling zone name even though my zone class doesn't have a name attribute or method, which I can define with this. The nice thing about the attr method here is that it defines a setter and getter method automatically, and since this is probably going to be one way, I'll define it as a reader attribute that is read only, so I automatically get a name method that I can call, which should resolve this error. I apologize that there will be quite a bit of errors because this cookbook had been working before, but I've completely restructured it, and so things will break quite frequently, I guess. But we'll get to it. And now it runs successfully. It does call the NSDX zone resource for example.com. Doesn't break, and that's fine. So we can go a step further. And try and add a record to this zone. www.example.com. This thing up here is just a string. It's more meant as a comment in this case, because name and zone together have the actual information of the host name. The fully qualified domain name here, it's www.example.com. So I could also say, okay, that's web server or something like that. The properties of the resource are what's important, not the name of the property. In this case, in many cases, the name property of a chef resource is more or less the same as the name I write up here. But in my case, the record resource requires name and zone to be passed in separately. And since I have to do this anyway, I don't want to duplicate it up here. So this string basically is just there because it has to be there. Because a resource needs to have a unique name. So that's something I have to take into account. So probably simply repeating what I'm passing in below is the most secure thing. It's the most safe thing here to do. Because well, it's not even unique now. I would have to include the type as well. I'll have to think about this later. It's a minor thing, but it's not quite unimportant. Yeah, one thing after another. Let's see if this works. Probably not. Yeah. So let's see why it breaks. There is no method zone for zone registry. There should be. Let's take a look at our library here. Zone. Well, there is, but I'm not sure if my record resource is up to date. No, it uses the add record helper, which I'll discard completely, I guess. I'll use all these hash fields here directly in to create a record object, which is a resource record. Oh, it's a NSDX resource record new, and I need a registry again, registry STX zone registry, and I pass in the node object, the server object, and after creating the record object, I can call a registry. No, I need the zone first. Zone. Oh no, it's a registry zone. And I'll use the zone property in this case, just to go back. Here, the zone property has the name of the zone. So I can use this here. Here, new resource zone. If I don't have that, I probably should break here. So I probably should do something like unless storage hash key zone name chef log, that's probably an error. Error, no such zone. Let's do it this way. If it exists, I'll give it back. Otherwise, I'll at least log an error. Welcome back, Cobra. Still breaking in more interesting ways. Still, there's no method zone for zone registry. Oh, I'm calling it as a class. That's not supposed to be the... Let's take another look. In zone RB line 12 in add record. Oh, there's still the helper method, and I should get rid of these helpers because they only confuse things. So let's see. These methods are empty anyway, so I can remove them. Come on. Let's simply... If I need them, I'll get them back easily. But... this should be sufficient. Get a registry, get the zone from the registry. Create a record and then say zone add record. So we go from the zone registry to the zone and then add the resource record to the zone. I know the feeling, Cobra. That's exactly how I started. Looking at things other people built and not understanding a little. But it gets better. Now, there's probably a helper method called that doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. In resources record line 32. That is strange. Undefined method. Add record. Sticks resources record. Line 32. It almost looks like I didn't write the file. Oh, here's my error. No such zone, example.com. Interesting. And then add record doesn't work. In NSDX resources record. So, well, it should use the zone variable upon making the record. Well, the basic logic is, what I could do is, first, since we are dealing with the record, create the record object here. And then we need to store this record object somewhere. And for this, we need to get a registry. Use this registry to get the zone with that particular name, and then we can add the record we've created above to this zone. But this makes a bit more sense in terms of the dependencies. But I have the feeling that I'm overlooking something here. So there's no zone example.com in the first place, even though I declared it previously. That's something that shouldn't happen anyway. And then it calls add record on an array. Of course, an array doesn't have an add record method. Why? Oh, of course. Oh, wait. In terms of the zones, what I'm doing is I create a registry and then create a new zone object and add it to the registry. I guess I have a problem with call by reference and call by value here because of the storage hash thing. I might have gone a bit too far here. So let's make it a bit more literal and so do the initialization here. So we basically only use the node variable instead of having this shortcut, which might cause problems here that I named storage hash. So it's always node run state cookbook. Node run state cookbook has a key with the zone name, then I'll return node run state cookbook for this key, and for the zones I need to add the @ sign above, node run state cookbook and its keys. Return actually is optional because Ruby always returns the last value, the value of the last expression. So I can simply, I could write return add a node, blah, 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 but why do that if it's not necessary? That's exactly why this works as well. Either this is, oh, okay, in this case it's actually not okay. What I should do something like this, because previously I returned the value of this error method, whatever that value is, and then I probably tried to add a record on this, so that won't work. So this is more like it. If a method is only a one-liner, I can get rid of the return. Thanks for the hint. That might have solved the problem. At least the error messages will be a bit more clear. And there's another @ sign that's missing in zone line 15. Yep. Should be the last one. Oh man. What now? Undefined method add record for nil class. That's exactly the nil value I'm returning if it can't find the zone, which it should be able because we first create the zone and then try to add a record to it. So why isn't there let's see if this actually does what it's supposed to do. Doesn't look like it. There's no log output that it's actually adding the zone. Which is strange. Yeah, I'll just go back. So what we are dealing with is this. This is the zone resource. And I'm creating a registry for the current node. I'm creating a new zone and then I add this zone to the registry. And the registry should log this attempt. I initialize a new zone with these two fields, which happens down here. Okay. There are more than just a name. Yeah. So I'll simply use a catch-all argument here and say, okay, that's params name. The contact should be stored as well. And if we want to add more things later, we can do that. And then on top of that, it gets an array for its records. Okay. I don't think that was the problem. Except... yeah, that's exactly the same thing with your KW args. That looks very familiar. The only thing is that the asterisk is at a different position. Okay. Do I have two? I don't think there's a conflict between a method and a variable, because in the method call, these are symbols. This is basically a hash. So the hash key is name, and the... Oh, you mean zone? There is no method zone in this context here. No, no, I don't think there's a problem. The thing is, I'm calling registry add zone with something, whatever this is, and that should cause my registry to at least create a log entry. The zone method here is local to the object, so I can call registry.zone, but that shouldn't conflict with a variable that has the same name. And in this method, zone is a local variable that I'm using at several places here. The thing is, I'm confused why it doesn't at least do the log entry. Even if it does everything wrong, it should have a log entry. Okay, now the asterisk is problematic. Why is that? Yeah, it's a dictionary. In Ruby, it's called a hash. So params should be a hash anyway. Yeah, that looks better. And so we have the zone, we have the record, no error messages. Still no log entry, but that might be because, oh yeah, that is because by default only error and higher get logged, so info simply gets suppressed. I should have used put s, which is a simple print command, and that would have created the line I had been missing. Oh, it's always the little stuff, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. But if I set the log level to debug, my screen will be flooded, and that will completely confuse me as well as you. So there should be some line at some point. Yeah, here. It's adding zone example.com. It's just in this line here. Okie dokie. Now things get interesting. So my test recipe should work with all these records. And it should create a nice long array of records. It looks like it was the parameter count, and I'm not sure why, but yeah. Yeah, that's another problem with my test recipe, because I defined the zone for example.com, but down here I have another domain for which I haven't defined the zone. Okay, now we get a lot of records, 2 zones, very nice. Now we could still have errors in our business logic here because we don't use that data. Well done, Cobra. And we'll see if this works. Hey, Yoon Maki, thanks for following. Welcome to the stream. So, we'll see if this works. If let's see, let's comment out this part. So one place where all these zones turn up is in the main configuration file of NSD, because it needs a list of zone files. We'll have to create these zone files later, but at least we create this list of zone files here. Here's where I'm passing in the list of zones. So how do I get to my zone list here? So it's basically get the registry, STX zone registry, and call registry zones here. We'll see if this works. Oh, come on. Why am I stuck here in... Oh, yeah. If we add the master recipe to our node's run list, so it actually goes and installs NSD and does all that stuff. And then the configuration file for NSD should include the list of our zones, which are 2 default zones. And it worked from the start! You can see how it's writing the configuration file here. It says zone, here's a name, example.com, the zone file is example.com.zone, and another zone, not an example.com, and the zone file is not an example.com.zone. It worked from the start. Man, am I proud of myself. Okay, and you can see how Chef does a few extra stuff, so it changes the permissions for this file. Since the file has been changed, it also restarts the NSD service so it can read its configuration again. And these zones should now be served from the DNS server, except exactly this will break at this point because we don't have these zone files yet. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes Ruby error messages are a bit complicated with all the stack traces and stuff, and also how it handles nil. I guess that's a a bit idiosyncratic for Ruby. You'll get used to it basically, and you learn to read these things. Hey Cicero, how you doing? Welcome to the stream. That's an interesting question. Why does Ruby's creators not care about Windows? I'm not sure. I haven't used Windows in 20 years, I guess, and so far it's only been Linux and Mac OS, and when it comes to my workstations. I'm not familiar with the state of Ruby on Windows, and I'm actually not sure if they simply neglect Windows or if there's a reason why it isn't supported as much as on Unix-like operating system, which covers both Linux and Mac OS. So I can't comment on that. Basically, I don't know if it's the case that Ruby is behind on Windows, and if that's the case, I can't tell you the reason why it's the case. Well, now, final step. Write the zone files. Where is my master recipe? So since we need to write a file for each and every zone, I have created an iterator that runs over all the zones I have. And by doing an iterator, I can hide my behind-the-scenes storage from the recipe. So I can, in the recipe here, can simply say for all zones, and it's implemented where everything else is implemented as well. And that's in my library file here. Far below, I'll create an iterator in the chef recipe namespace, and what does it return? It should probably return. Nope, it does not. The iterator does nothing, except if we have our cookbook key, and under this cookbook key there should be an end. No, that's enough. That should be at least an empty hash. And no, it's not an empty hash, is it? It's an array. It's an array of zones, isn't it? Oh no, it's not an array. It's a hash organized by zone names. So I could iterate over it by, oops, key and value, name and zone, and I'll call the block for each zone. Which means I'll call the template resource for each zone, which then gets passed into this parameter here. So zone name and all that stuff should work. Zone records should work. Yeah, Let's see if this works as well. It'll probably break. There's always some little thing. Yes, there is. In this case, it doesn't really care about the return statement here. I should have a closer look. Syntax error. An unexpected keyword return. Expecting keyword then or semicolon. Cookbook keys and name return. Huh? In zone RB 91. What? Library zone. Syntax error, unexpected keyword end. Something's off here. In zone RB 15, there's a syntax error. Oh yeah. I accidentally joined these two lines. Huh. It created an nsd.conf, which was already up to date because it keeps the container running and it didn't change from last time, but it doesn't write any templates at all. So, why? Of course. Okay, that's... Wait a second. Node run state should have the key of my cookbook. So let's try and take a look at what node run state looks like. Doesn't seem to be get called at all. Something's wrong with my iterator here. Does it get called at all? Yeah, it does get called up here for all zones. It does get called before we even converge. Yeah, okay, that's the explanation. So what you need to know is that Chef has two phases. First of all, it executes all the Ruby and creates a list of resources that get called. So as soon as it goes to the recipes, there's an NSDX zone resource, then the NSDX record resource, then that one. Later we'll have a group resource that creates a Linux group. It creates a Linux user. It installs the package for NSD and so on. And it defines the resources to do so. And when it's finished, it goes and executes all these resources. And then that's when the actual change in the system happens. And as you can see, my for all zones gets called in the first phase when it interprets all the Ruby code, and before all my DNS record resources get defined. So at this point in time, I don't have any zones and records. So of course things are empty. That's exactly the reason why I also needed the lazy call up here, because I needed to tell Chef for the zones field, use registry.zones, but not at Ruby interpretation time, but at convergence time, which is later when this registry actually contains stuff. And I'm not sure how to do this here. I guess we need to do this in the zone resource itself. That makes more sense. The only thing is that it'll break at another point, but that's probably easy to fix. So let's see. So we not only register all that stuff, but we also create a template file for the zone. Now I'm getting into circular dependencies again, because I'm defining the zone first in order to be able to add the records to that zone afterwards. And that's so it's too early to write the zone file, because I need the records. That's an interesting problem. No, it's notifies. It's not Netflix. It means if this resource changes, i.e., if this template file gets modified because its input has changed, then notify the service resource named NSD to reload itself. In other words, if the zone file gets changed, the service needs to be reloaded for the change to be applied. Okay, so my basic logic here is working, but I'll have to resolve the dependencies. Basically, it's a hen and egg problem. And I guess I need a bit more time to think about this. I'll be back on Thursday with a solution. Thursday, 15:30 GMT. I'll probably be able to do the finishing touches on this, and also I'll probably prepare another recipe for this cookbook that can read JSON files, data bag items in chef speak, and create zone files from these JSON files. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for working with me here, especially Cobra, for all your support. I'd love if you'd follow the channel, and if you liked what you saw, spread the word, tell your friends and colleagues. I'll be back on Thursday, and hopefully I'll get the cookbook finished then. For the time being, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. Cheers.